Good morning. Well, let us go back for a while. I said at the beginning, it said God created the heavens and laid the foundation of the earth. And within the heavens, he had created these angelic beings who would live in his presence. Paul, the great apostle, says there are many different ranks amongst these. But the most important of them all was the very firstborn of these angelic beings. And he was given the name of Lucifer. See, when God looks after the foundation of the material universe, the first thing he says is, let there be light. Well, amongst the angelic beings, the first of these angelic beings who had ever been created was called Lucifer, the light bearer. God was creating these beings, and the first one was Lucifer. Now, for reasons which again are beyond our understanding, even though these beings were in the presence of God, some of them rebelled against God. We are told that the leader of this rebellion was, in fact, the very first of his creation, Lucifer. And he is the one who decides that he's going to rise up against God and become worshipped as God is worshipped. He wants to take the place of God. And he says, I'm going to raise up my throne above the heavens. I'm going to be the person that all these angelic beings worship. I don't just want to be their leader. I want to be worshipped as God. God has to stop him. God has to stop him. And he says at that moment, he changes his name. He changes his name from Lucifer, the light bearer, to Satan or Satan, the adversary. And for reasons beyond our understanding, we have an idea that even within these perfect heavens that God had created, somehow sin had crept in, and certain of the angels had passed into rebellion. Now we know this because as we look at Adam and Eve in the garden, suddenly this great archangel, realizing what God is doing and that God is creating these material universe and these beings called humanity in this universe to care for it, in his rebellion against God, enters into the garden. He knows that in the garden there is that tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And he knows that God has told these human beings that they're not to eat of that tree. He, because of his rebellion against God, has to somehow try and get these human beings to enter into his rebellion and to enter his forces and actually destroy what God is doing in this material universe. So he enters the garden. He takes the form of a creature. He comes to Eve. Now the amazing thing is that Eve isn't surprised by seeing him. And I believe probably she wasn't surprised by seeing him because as Adam and Eve in a perfect state, they were probably fully aware of the angelic beings around them. They were working with God, and they understood how God worked. And they understood about these beings who existed. But this one comes to her, and he says to her quite simply, did God say you could not eat of any tree in the garden? You see, it's a preposterous statement, isn't it? Did God say you mustn't eat of any tree in the garden? It's like a throwaway statement. And he said, oh yes, he said, we can eat of any tree. God said we can do anything we like. We are in complete control of the garden. God has given it to us as our inhabitation. In fact, we're supposed to extend the garden, and we're supposed to move it out until it encompasses the whole world. And together, we're looking after the animals, and we're looking after the garden, and we're making sure it works properly. Yes, we can eat of any tree of the garden. Except for one. Of course, that one over there. But you already know about that. Because God says you can eat of any tree of the garden and use anything that's in the garden, but we mustn't eat of that tree, and we mustn't even touch it. You see, something's gone wrong here, because God never said you mustn't touch it. He didn't say you can't look at it. What he says is you must not eat of it. So in a sense, Eve is almost playing a game. She's almost creating a deceit with Satan. And she's saying, no, we're not even supposed to touch that tree. Satan says, oh no, you're being fooled, You're really being fooled. God doesn't want you to eat of that tree, because if you do it, you'll become just like him. You'll become wise. There's a reason for that tree being there. God doesn't want you to do it for that reason. The rebellion which has started in the heavens is now being introduced into the material realm, the realm of the earth. Because being fooled by Satan in this way, the one who had been Lucifer, being fooled by him, she takes of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and she eats of it. She gives some to her husband as well. He eats of it. Rebellion has started. Man has turned against God. Amen.